It's late, but thank you so much. Next time we're gonna ask for you. Shreya, get her name. Okay, starting over. Hello, everybody. I'm Maria Lisa Christie, Director of Women and Gender and International Development at CIRA, the Center for International Research, Education, and Development. I'll introduce my colleague in just a moment. But Shreya is the grad student for this year. Raise your hand, Shreya. Hello, who will be helping and send you emails. And Lumbini was the grad student for 2 years, and she's here to support us today. Thank you. So welcome to the Hybrid Women and Gender and International Development discussion series. So as of this morning, for our virtual and in-person panel featuring Dr. Bernice Owusu-Brown, we actually, as of last night, it was 103. This morning it was 106. So we have a lot of people registered on Zoom, 19 in person, and like 88 or something on Zoom. So in addition to many diverse folks in the US, we have people joining us from 6 other countries, including Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, Bangladesh, and Canada. So welcome all. Yes, your friends. Okay, so as I said earlier, please note this will be recorded and it'll be available on our website later. It'll actually be on our gender development website, but also on the library's VTech Works. So by staying on, if you have your camera turned on, you may be recorded. So if you don't have your face recorded, you can turn that off. So before I introduce our speaker, I want to ask you to reflect on the land and labor recognition statement from Virginia Tech. So our land acknowledgement is that Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo-Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that the Moral Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in California and other areas in the West. The labor recognition is as follows. Virginia Tech acknowledges that its Blacksburg campus sits partly on land that was previously the site of the Smithfield and Solitude plantations owned by members of the Preston family. Between 1770s and 1860s, the Prestons and other local white families that owned parcels of what became Virginia Tech also owned hundreds of enslaved people. Enslaved Black people generated resources that financed Virginia Tech's predecessor institution, the Preston and Olin Institute, and they also worked on the construction of its building. That is a shortened version. There's a longer version on the Office of Inclusion and Diversity's website, probably under Inclusive VT. You can also ask me. Okay, some brief housekeeping notes. We're still gonna have about 20-25 minutes of presentation, followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A. For the people in the room, we'll be staying open until 2 and you can help yourselves. Sorry, Zoom people, you cannot have a bagel, but we'll think of you. Okay, so we're asking you to stay muted if you're on Zoom to enable the speaker to present without interruption. And then afterwards, you can raise your hands and I'll take turns at asking people in the room if they have questions. And then also people on Zoom. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in chat and we'll be tracking them in a Google Doc and then go take them from there as well. Okay. All right, now to introduce our speaker, which you've actually been waiting for. Dr. Owusu-Brown is currently a postdoctoral fellow with the Department of Economics in the College of Science here at Virginia Tech. I met Dr. Owusu-Brown a year ago. And I'm very happy to have her here today as our first speaker, and I congratulate her on her new position as postdoc in the Department of Economics, where she's going to be teaching, among other things that she'll do, economics of gender. And I'm sure she will radically revise the curriculum. So, her graduate, I hope. That's why they brought you in. So her graduate research focused mainly on the economics of intimate partner violence, a non-traditional interdisciplinary topic seldomly studied by economists, more so in the West African nation of Ghana than over other parts. This research examined obstacles to policymakers' efforts to eliminate intimate partner violence and proposing solutions to mitigate these. A paradoxical finding in her research highlights that policies to enhance women's growth could simultaneously increase her likelihood of being abused due to the abuser's parochial mindset against the dynamic shift caused by women's empowerment. Her recommendation then to the policymakers based on this observation is to be cognizant of the simultaneous increase in a woman's likelihood of experiencing intimate partner violence when determining the policy framework. I'm sure all her hard work to study this matter will enable her to be an impactful educator when she teaches the course of Economics of Gender at BT this semester. So the title of her talk today is Women's Labor Market Participation and Intimate Partner Violence in Ghana, a multi-level analysis. So I will now, thank you.
Thank you, Maria Lisa. I think she did my work for me. I don't know whether to continue.
What I do? I took something of yours. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Maria Lisa. So my name, she rightly said, is Bernice Owusu Brown. And to kickstart this fall's Women and Gender in Development series, I present on women's labor market participation and intimate partner violence in Ghana, a multi-level analysis. Now I say this in passing, this is still a work in progress. So then I would welcome as many questions, inputs, and comments to make it a better policy brief by the time I decide to publish it. Okay. So the foundation of this research is rooted in Amartya Sen's capability approach, which in recent decades has emerged as a very significant theoretical framework that explains development, well-being, and justice. So what the capability approach has done in the recent decades is sparked an extensive interdisciplinary research, okay, that focuses or that has led to the development of a new policy model known as the human development approach. Now, what this approach advocates is that development should no longer be viewed or defined as growth, but then the definition should be extended to include the multi-dimensional perspective of the advancement of human well-being. And one major concept with the human development approach is its emphasis on freedom from violence, by arguing that in the absence of violence, individuals are better able to foster their well-being and it enhances their advancement. Now, implied in this is that violence or intimate partner violence, and by extension, any other form of violence, is a freedom violation, and specifically intimate partner violence is rooted in gender-based power relations. Now, intimate partner violence, henceforth I will refer to it as IPV, to just shorten it, is a global phenomenon and over the years has occupied a central position in international discourses. As a result, a number of charters and conventions have been agreed upon with the overall arching goal of eliminating every form of gender-based violence. And some of these include the World Conference on Human Rights, the 2013 agreed conclusion on the elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls. Most recently, intimate partner violence has featured on the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 5, which seeks to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. The specific targets 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 are directed at intimate partner violence. And then they recommend that, and then to solve it, the SDGs suggest that there's a need to undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, and also adopt and strengthen policies and regulations. So as we go through, this is the working definition I adopt from Suhini, who says, intimate partner violence is the manifestation of historically unequal power relations between men and women, which has led to the domination over and discrimination against women by men, and to the prevention of the full advancement of women. Globally, the WHO estimates that more than 1 in 4 women between the ages 15 and 49 at least have experienced one form of IPV, all right? And this puts it at 641 million women all over the world. Now, the two regions under the WHO that have the known highest prevalence of intimate partner violence is Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And Ghana finds herself within the Sub-Saharan Africa region. In Ghana, the estimates put it at 28% of women and 20% of men having experienced at least one form of intimate partner violence. And this number just falls short of the original estimates by a small margin. Now, the Gender Studies and Human Rights Documentation Center in Ghana argues that this number is an underestimation because most often intimate partner violence occurs in the confines of one's home, and therefore is most likely to go unnoticed or unreported. So this number is probably an underestimation. Now, to solve the problem of intimate partner violence, gender scholars particularly have recommended the need to unravel intimate partner violence as a complex anomaly that is deeply seated in sexuality, self-identity, gender-based power relation, and social institute. Ghana, I must say, does not prescribe to any form of intimate partner violence. However, it is argued that it does not attract the form of sanction that it should warrant. And this basically is because most forms of intimate partner violence is sheltered under cultural norms and practices and misconception of religious beliefs. And one typical example is the redefining of some parts of the Sharia penal code that allows husbands to chastise their wife as long as they are not causing them any bodily harm. Okay. Why should we even care? So the repercussions of intimate partner violence vary. Okay. Apart from it being a fundamental violation of human rights, it is known to traumatize its victims, dehumanize perpetrators, and then leave a mark on children who witness it. And there's documented evidence of increased substance abuse, HIV prevalence, derailed mental health, and homicide among women who are victims. Similarly, a country's labor supply and its productive capacity is likely to suffer loss if women should fall ill or die from victimization. This affects local economies through workforce absenteeism, loss of productivity, loss of human capital, the disincentive for investment, and then the overall thing is it leads to a slower growth in development. Now, the Parliament of Ghana, in its efforts to contribute to curbing intimate partner violence in Ghana, sanctioned the Domestic Violence Act 732 in 2007 and outlined a comprehensive legal framework for the prevention and protection against domestic violence and criminalized various acts of physical and sexual violence, economic and psychological abuse, and intimidation in domestic relations. Now, we can't downplay this effort. However, given what the numbers project, there is a need to ensure that these laws are not only enacted, but understood by the broader population if ever Ghana seeks to totally eradicate any form of intimate partner violence. So back to Amartya Sen's capability approach. He argues that to take down intimate partner violence one determinant at a time, there should be an increase in female bargaining power by encouraging female labor market participation. And this is reflected in both economics and non-economic bargaining power modules. Now, what these models hypothesize is this: if women's bargaining power increases through their labor market participation, it leads to a decline in their exposure and experience of intimate partner violence. Now, this has been tested in the literature across, and two schools of thought emerge. Now, one school of thought agrees with the argument put forth by the bargaining power models. That says that a woman's increasing bargaining power through her labor market participation decreases her experience of intimate partner violence. Another school of thought also suggests that her increased spousal violence increases her labor market participation as a way of escape from the abuse. This suggests, therefore, a bi-causal relationship between intimate partner violence and a woman's work status, and that a woman's work status is endogenously determined. Now, conscious of this bi-causal relations, I pose two questions, okay, as it pertains to Ghana. The first one being, does a woman's labor market participation have implication for her exposure to intimate partner violence? So I'm going to tell the story of Ghana. And then what is the direction of the causation, or what the direction of association? Does her involvement in the labor market expose her to increase partner violence or decrease partner violence? So for data, what I did was employ secondary data from the most recent Ghana Family Life and Health Survey, which is a nationally representative survey that collects data on both quantitative and qualitative informations that borders around demographic, social, health status, and indicators of domestic violence amongst both men and women. So the survey was able to sample a total of 4,995 individuals. But for the purpose of my study, I limit the analysis to ever married or ever partnered women between the ages of 15 and 60 who were asked questions about their experience and exposure to intimate partner violence. So it brought down my sample to 2,248. Let's look at how the labor market participation looks in Ghana. So the overall labor market participation is pegged at 70.5%. However, 72% of males, and 65% of females are actively engaged in the labor market. And the formal sector employs just 20% of the entire labor force. Now, 92% of women find themselves in the informal sector, which is characterized by low wages, bad working conditions, uncertainties, and underemployment. Ghana has made efforts through its structural readjustment program to increase women's representation, especially in the formal sector, and their overall labor market participation, with the goal of empowering them and advancing their well-being. Okay, so these are efforts that I do not in any way downplay. Now let's look at my two main variables of interest. The dependent variable being intimate partner violence. So with this, respondents were asked a host of questions that falls within 5 domains of intimate partner violence. That is physical, sexual, emotional, economic, and social violence. What I do with this is to create an additive scale, What I do is to create an additive scale that summarizes these 5 types of intimate partner violence into an index. And then I recode the outcome of the transformation into a dummy variable so that intimate partner violence equal to 1 if a woman has experienced violence in at least one of the 5 domains, and 0 if she hasn't experienced any form of intimate partner violence. Now for my independent variable, I tap into the question, what describes your current work situation best? And based on responses from the women, I categorize their work status into 2. Either you are employed or you are unemployed. Now let's look at the method. So I use a heavily quantitative-based approach to answer my research question. And having mentioned earlier, the presence or the bi-causal relationship between the woman's work status and intimate partner violence, suggesting work status is endogenous. Now, to correct for that or to test for that, I first estimate a recursive bivariate probit model, which is a 2-stage equation model. So in the first stage, I regress the woman's working status on other exogenous variables labeled as Z1. Okay, and in the second stage, regress her experience of intimate partner violence on the predicted value of her work status and other exogenous variables. Now, the rule of thumb is this: if the covariance between the error terms in the first stage and the second stage is 0, we say that they are independently distributed and there's no bi-causal relationship or there's no endogeneity resulting from this reverse causality. Okay, so then we would need the covariance, that is rho, to be 0 to conclude that there's no reverse causality. So from the preliminary results from the recursive bivariate probit model, it confirms for Ghana that a woman's engagement in the labor market participation, as the highlighted 1.613, that a woman's involvement in the labor market participation increases her experience or her exposure to intimate partner violence. But what is of interest with this result is the value of the rho. So when we look at the value of the rho, it is non-zero. And because the value of rho is non-zero, we fail to accept the null hypothesis and conclude that there actually exists a reverse causality, okay, and compounds the problem of endogeneity. So how do I correct for this? I go further and estimate an endogenous treatment assignment model, which is a two-stage instrumental variable approach. Now, with this approach, what is required of me is to find an instrument, okay, that positively affects a woman's working status, but would only affect her experience of intimate partner violence through her labor market participation. Okay, so in the first stage, again, I regress the woman's working status on the instruments and other exogenous variables. And then the second stage becomes my basic model. So for an instrument, what I did was to create a cluster average of the working status of other women in the vicinity, right, of the woman being observed, to proxy for how employment opportunities available to other women impact that single woman who is being observed's labor market participation. So my test for the viability of the instrument, again, shows the positive relationship between the cluster average of the employment status of other women in the vicinity and the employment or the labor market participation of the woman that is being observed. So as more and more women within the community enter into the labor market, it positively impacts a woman's willingness or decision to also enter into the labor market. And again, the endogenous treatment assignment model confirms the problem of endogeneity, all right? And so after correcting for this reverse causality, I then ran my main model to ascertain whether a woman's working status has any implication for her experience of domestic violence. And then also mention that I do account for other variables, but then in this discussion, I'll just limit it to my main variable of interest, which is her working status. So the conclusion, what I find, okay, from the result is this: if a woman is actively engaged in the labor market, it increases the likelihood that she suffers intimate partner violence at the hands of an abusive partner. And this finding, it finds meaning in the male backlash and the gender role stress theories, which says that women who are engaged in the labor market are not dedicated to their traditional household chores. And then this represents a breakdown in already laid down rules, and consequently attract violence from a partner who is predisposed to abuse and has an emotional attachment to these traditional laid down rules. Okay. Another explanation to this positive association is the slow pace at which gender norms and gender rules respond to women empowerment. This therefore suggests that over time, or over a long run period, when behaviors are able to be reformed, there's the likelihood that this association will be there's a likelihood that the effect of the woman's labor market participation on her experience of intimate partner violence will be at variance with this inimical outcome that is being observed. Okay, so then it will require further panel long run data to be able to say for certain that this is what the situation is. So I further go to argue that individuals live within communities and a broader society. So then, apart from looking at the occurrence of intimate partner violence at the individual level, there is the need to situate the problem of intimate partner violence as a whole throughout society and look at how societal impact influences a woman's experience of intimate partner violence. Okay, and for that, again, I use a quantitative approach by estimating a multi-level mixed effect logistic regression. Okay, so I limit the explanation again to just the circle part. Now, the data just allowed me sampled just 4 societal attributes. Okay, the education of women in society, the level of acceptance of physical violence in society, the work status of women in the community or cluster, and then the standard of living of other women in the vicinity. What I find, again, unfortunately is blocking it. Let me see what that. Okay. So the results limited, it didn't do anything, to model 4 is blocking it, so we can't see all of it. Seems to suggest that most societal attributes don't make the situation any better. So societal attributes don't mitigate the negative effect of a woman's participation in the labor market on her experience of intimate partner violence. Now, to be able to understand why this was the case, I went back to the qualitative data to pull up some responses, okay, to be able to understand why societal attributes is not doing much in terms of reducing intimate partner violence. So in one of the focus group discussions, they were asked, if you see a husband and wife physically assault each other, what would you do? One respondent said, I will not separate them. I'll just pass by, because why should a man allow himself to be beaten by a woman? Another said, I will go and separate them. But if I could, I will support the man to sack his wife because it is disrespectful. Why should you fight or beat your husband? Another said, okay, I'll separate them. Then another respondent said, I will not mind them. I will pass by, because why a woman should beat her husband is a taboo in our community. Plus, it is not my business. So to some extent, this reflects the opinions of others in society when it comes to the appreciation of intimate partner violence. And to some extent explains why it is not doing much in reducing the impact. So 2 key findings for the work. The first one being that the work status for a woman's labor market participation significantly increases the odds that she becomes a victim of intimate partner violence. And what I suggest here, which Maria Elisa said in the brief, is that policymakers remain cognizant of the unintended ill consequences that arise as a result of women's participation in the labor market. And to do this, they need to encourage gender sensitization programs when they are implementing female employment agendas. The second key finding is that societal attributes do not mitigate the prevalence of intimate partner violence. That being the case, however, I don't discount the impact of society in fighting intimate partner violence. What I therefore conclude on is that there should be more society or community engagements that are directed at unseating certain traditional norms in society that has normalized intimate partner violence. Okay, so then society can still do much to help fight, but it will require unseating these traditional ideas, okay, to be able to see the positive impact. So I conclude in the words of the late or in the former United Nations Secretary Kofi Annan. He says, violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation and is perhaps the most pervasive. It knows no boundaries of geography, culture, or wealth. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality, development, and peace. So further research, what I seek to further do, based on this preliminary investigation, go back, collect data, because the very first round, like of the Ghana Family Life and Health Survey, like I said, was in 2015, which is almost 8 years ago. So that the goal is to go back, collect data as much as I can, qualitative, to be able to find meaning into why these associations exist in Ghana. At this point, I'll bring the discussion to a close. And like I said, welcome as many questions, inputs, and comments to help grow the paper further. Thank you.
Oh, wait, trio, take yours.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Bernice. Thank you so much for sharing your project. Up closer.
You have to also speak up louder in the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not projecting me. I get it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your project. So I've been working in Ghana on things related to gender and labor for a long time, but from a historical and anthropological perspective. And as you were talking, I was reminded of a lot of that scholarship, right? And I wondered what those historical and anthropological studies might, how they might help us contextualize some of the great questions that you're asking. Because women have played a very active role in the labor market in Ghana for several hundred years at least, right? Taken up a large percentage of the labor market. What we know from studies over at least the last 50 years or so, particularly for market traders, but also people who smoke fish and other things, is that for starters, when women's earnings outstrip those of men, that has an enormous consequence, and that often, even though they're working in the quote unquote informal sector, women are often the primary breadwinners for their families, and are really dominating the family economy, which causes all kinds of challenges that women have to negotiate in really sensitive ways, right? And that they have been negotiating for many decades, right? So, does it matter what part of the economy women are participating in? Does it matter how much money they make in comparison to the men in the household? And I guess kind of an unrelated, but I think interesting question is how does the idea that men fear women, which they say all the time in Ghana, it's a very common slogan, right? Like fear women, save your life. Right, it's a really common Trocho slogan. Men talk about it constantly. They're afraid of women. They say they have tempers, that they have strong personalities. Women in Ghana are known to be very strong, right? Strong-willed, strong, very powerful economically, but in other ways as well, right? So to what degree does that shape what's going on here, and how do we explain that, given the prevalence of intimate partner violence that you found?
So that's a great submission. Let me try and deal with the very first one that has to do with the relative earnings and women being the breadwinners and the fact that they are mostly in the informal sector. So by the restructural adjustment program trying to increase women's representation in the formal sector, in essence, is to further advance their well-being, to be able to stand on their own much stronger. So then, in another unrelated piece I looked at, I look at how empowerment and property status also plays a role. So then, like you said, in Ghana is almost, if I dare say, a patriarchal society. Okay. So then a woman's ability to stand on her own plays a much influence in the amount of control that the husband or an abusive partner has over her. So then if you better their labor market participation or the outcome of their labor market participation by increasing the amount of bargaining power available to them, they're able to get access to other resources that limits the control of the man over them within the household. Okay. Again, in most rural areas in Ghana, you can't just leave your marriage and go back to your parents' home because you are being abused. So, and there's the absence of shelters, either permanent or temporary. So then if a woman can afford a shelter outside of that abusive relationship, empowering her and increasing the monetary value available to her can help her escape. It provides an exit for her sort of. Okay, so that's with regard to that one. And whether it matters which sector. To some extent, it matters. Because the formal sector, like I said, just employs about 20% of the workforce. And most of these are men. The cultural norms on equal access to education and other opportunities prevent women from being able to infiltrate the formal sector. So kind of the men are perceived as being smarter. Not that they are smarter, but then the opportunities are unequal. So then women tend to find themselves more in the informal sector. And then some men, I wouldn't say all, ditching their roles force women to assume the role of the head of the household or the breadwinner. Not that is the norm, but that's the condition they find themselves in. And sometimes they also find themselves being the head of the household, not by choice, but also by way of abusive partners, reinforcing their control and their dominance by letting you do more than you should do when it comes to already laid down traditional rules. Okay, so that's another angle that I can look at it from. So with the historical and anthropological roles, I did look back and then borrowed some of the theories to be able to explain why this is. So I also look at it from the relative to resource theory angle. I look at it from the male backlash theory, gender role stress theories, to be able to appreciate these theories from anthropological and historical perspectives and explain why that is. So I kind of dig in from every place to explain the economic perspective of intimate partner violence.
Okay, we have, I don't know if you guys can hear me, but we have several questions on Zoom. So I'm going to read, I'm going to give 2 Zoom questions and then check back here in the room. So one is from Onwumbiko Agozino, and I'm very sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Okay, but I'm going to read it. Is there a difference in matrilineal versus patrilineal families in Ghana? Is there a relationship with the breakfast hypothesis? Is breakfast adhered to in families with women working outside the home?
The very first one.
First,
is there
a difference in matrilineal versus patrilineal families in Ghana? And then,
yes, there is. So some tribes in Ghana are patriarchal, some patrilineal, not patriarchal, and some are matrilineal. So then again, in one of my variables I control for ethnicity, to look at how patriarchal societies or patriarchal tribes, the association between intimate partner violence and ethnicity. So what I find is, for most part, why do I keep saying patriarchal? Patrilineal tribes, okay, women who belong to such tribes tend to find themselves being exposed to more intimate partner violence. Doesn't hold for all the tribes. Especially for the Ewe tribe, I found the opposite. That the Ewe tribe is patrilineal in nature. What I find with that one is that women who belong to such patrilineal tribes rather are exposed to decreasing intimate partner violence, which could be explained from the point of behavior being reformed over time, so that it's not cast in stone. Now, in the matrilineal side, the association is almost straightforward. Women who belong to matrilineal tribes are less likely to experience intimate partner violence because of the strong bond that exists in such societies. And then the second one, the breakfast, I think is something about.
Yes, is there a relationship with the breakfast hypothesis? Is breakfast adhered to in families with women working outside the home?
So I can't speak for all households if I have to speak for myself, I don't do breakfast. I'm married, I belong to a household, but I don't do breakfast. But then again, if you situate it within traditional laid down rules, then it is expected of them to do that. And then failing to do that exposes them to intimate partner violence from an abusive partner. So yeah, that's how much I can say to that.
Okay, so now I'm going to read one from Eleanor Cambridge. Hi, in certain cultures, there is stigma for reporting, even informally, intimate partner violence. Is this applicable in Ghana? And if so, was stigma one of your other variables? How might one address potential underreporting due to stigma in a model?
So yes, so in Ghana, we have what we call those domestic violence and victim support units. And I did a brief reading on their report. And then again, from the qualitative part of the data, what you realize is, for most part, when the individuals were interviewed by themselves in the absence of the brother, especially if they were women, some argue that it's not that they don't report, they do report. But for instance, you go to DOPSU, you report to somebody who is friends with your husband. You are encouraged to take the matter back home and resolve it. So there are institutional barriers and blockades, all right, which accounts for why there's an underestimation. So yes, it does exist. These institutional barriers and blockades sometimes explain why it is underrepresented. And another thing, so I was speaking to Amanda the last time, and I was telling her, intimate partner violence, or the discussion on violence itself, is not something that is easily welcomed in the Ghanaian society. There's a little of a pushback, okay? Now, do some of these women even know that the acts being meted out against them is called intimate partner violence? So to some extent, these things have been normalized into society, so it's acceptable. And again, explain why there will be an estimation of the numbers. So if my husband beats me and I think it's okay, I deserved it, I don't see it as abuse. I see it as I deserve to be beaten for whatever I did wrong. So I wouldn't go report. Some do go report. But again, back to the institutional barriers, we are advised to take it home and deal with it as a family.
Maybe one question in here, but I do want to remind you that perhaps the Zoom people will leave at 1:30, and I don't know, raise your hands if you're going to want to stay, because we could stay, you have more questions, because we can continue the discussion, but okay, good.
Hi, can anyone hear me? Can they hear me? Okay, so I found what you said interesting about the matrilineal and patrilineal families, because I come from both a matrilineal and patrilineal family. My mother is Eva and my dad is Fante. So in terms of things like inheritance and history and things like that, I was always taught that although we're assimilated, like historically, this is how things are done. When it comes to the government implementing measures to prevent intimate partner violence, or maybe educate or push towards, how influential is, I guess, religion or culture or tribalistic influences on like how the government is able to implement that? Because some things are, I guess, in more rural areas or more informal sectors are handled, I guess, with like tribal chiefs or local leaders and things like that. So how can the government reach those areas?
So it takes a lot of advocacy and campaign exercise to reach one community, one individual at a time. It's not going to be done tomorrow. It's not going to be done next year. It's going to take a period of time. So like I said, it would involve sensitizing individuals. So then when I started this project, part of this project back in Ghana, what I did was sampled a few students in the University of Ghana to be able to understand how they appreciate intimate partner violence. And it will surprise you that even at that institutional level, most of them didn't know what it was. And even if they knew what it was, they didn't know there was a name for it. Okay, so it would take sensitizing and educating one individual at a time. I must admit, there will be a lot of backlash when it comes to the patrilineal and the matrilineal divide, because not, especially if you are from Ghana, we are very proud of our culture and how we hold on to it. Not to say every part of the culture is wrong, but to reform some parts of culture to be able to better the lives of women, it's important to engage these tribal chiefs and then local government officials at the rural level. So it will start with education from that level. It doesn't have to be formal. Okay, so it has to be informal, and the education has to be transformational enough, okay, to be able to change the story that comes with it.
Okay, let me read one from Noshaba Zafar. So they have two questions, but the first one is how to address the issues in a community where religious leaders interpret religious teaching in favor of men who have all right to treat his women, even physical violence is justified. Additionally, how to make women understand that being beaten up by husband does not make their husbands a man, and it is not right to, neither is it an obligation of a wife to be beaten up and not raise her voice. It's very complicated, and gender socialization communities go through from generations to generations and decades, double exclamation point.
Yeah, so I do agree with the assertion. It's going to be difficult. I'm not saying it's going to come on a silver platter. So then this is my contribution from the economic perspective. I welcome contribution from every other discipline so that the problem is dealt with holistically. So yes, there are religious misconceptions. Now, I can't go tell someone to go to another church because your church is preaching wrong. The best you can do is, like I addressed Sydney's question, through education and now creating awareness. And this we can do through social media platforms, like use every available platform to start one individual at a time, okay? I know in Ghana, the government has no business in religious activities. So it's going to be very difficult to be able to infiltrate these religious sectors. But then, like I said, treat it one individual at a time. So I won't come to your church and then all of a sudden say your religious leader is doing the worst. But then the education and advocacy at the individual level, starting from one individual at a time, will go a long way to speak to that. And I do admit that intimate partner violence is a very, very complex phenomenon. Very, very complex. But what I'm trying to do in my capacity is to take it down one determinant at a time. So I can't do all the work. But then, as much as possible, contribute my quota from the economic perspective to be able to appreciate what will work better.
We're going to try to have a person unmute. You want to go ahead and ask the person, see if we can hear them with our technical sophistication. Are they talking? Yeah. So it is 1:30. So I just want to formally say thank you for coming. And if anybody needs to leave now, go ahead. I'm sorry we got started 20 minutes late. And we are sending a link for the survey, and we'll keep the discussion going here till just before 2. But don't feel bad if you have to leave. It is officially the end of our meeting. Did the person speak? Because I can't hear them. I think it might be easier if they text it, but and then Daniel Amoa has raised their hand as well.
Hello.
Yes, good.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting research and a great presentation, Bernice. So Ghana is absolutely a patriarchal society and has a high prevalence of informal economy. So there is a sociocultural argument that links patriarchy with poverty and informality. And I would like to ask you, would you see any different from your findings when you disaggregate your variables or your data, looking at the educational level of the participants and also the rural-urban dichotomy? Would there be any difference from your findings?
Now, because I've not done that, I can't say on authority that there will be, but then I can a prior anticipate that if we do the rural-urban dissemination, a prior, I would predict that in the rural areas where it is heavily traditional and most traditional rules are still being adhered to, there's the likelihood that this positive association will continue. However, for the urban space, a prior, I'm going to say is going to be a little ambiguous. I can't say for certain because again, because of migration, rural-urban migration, there's also the mix of cultures in the urban space. So then a prior, I can't determine what happens with the rural-urban migration. With education, I think with education is this, like I said earlier, it should be transformational and reformational enough. So to the extent that the content of education does not promote unseating these traditional ideas, then I don't see education as doing much in correcting the problem, okay? So then raising awareness through education, whether formal or informal, should be directed at solving the problem and educating the individuals. So we can have someone with a graduate degree who would still think the same way, excuse me to say, someone who has no education would think when it comes to these traditional norms and rules. So then again, go back to the fact that the education should be reformational and transformational enough to be able to penetrate certain spaces. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Usuburn, I want to ask a second question from Nashaba Zafar. I don't know if they're still on there, but it takes the intimate partner violence out of the home space. So it's an interesting question. How to address the issues of triple workload of women who participate in formal labor work, and there they also face sexual exploitation and abuse at workplaces?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good comment I can take into consideration. And like I said, this is a preliminary result work. So to look at workplace sexual abuse, but by by the definition from earlier, I was just looking at intimate partner violence within the household and not outside the household. That doesn't mean it doesn't play out the same way within the job market. But then again, my focus was on intimate partner violence.
So you can't do everything.
I can't do everything.
But you've raised some good questions.
Yeah,
So,
but it would be an interesting thing to look
I'm
at.
going to formally close this and then invite you all to come up and chat and eat and take the food with you. So let me just officially say thank you all for attending this presentation, and thank you, of course, particular to our speaker, Dr. Usuburn. And we are sharing a short survey. Shreya sent it out. Please answer it. We have dismal response rates. You as an economist, you'd be amazed at how poor. So just take 3 minutes. So it's very important to us. Okay, our next event is going to be very exciting and is coming up on October 12th. Ms. Jennifer Langill is a doctoral candidate in geography at McGill University in Canada. She'll be talking about gender transformations embedded in livelihood transitions, changes and continuities in Hmong gender roles and relations in Northern Thailand. Do not miss that one. And check our website. And please, if you didn't sign in coming in, please sign in on your way out. And look at the flyer for the whole semester. We have another one. The third one for the semester is Dr. Sana Ilahi from Pakistan, who's speaking on gender negotiation of urban spaces among transgender persons in Pakistan, dismantling the colonial binary. So on that, I'd like to formally bring this to a close and thank you all for helping us launch the discussion series.